Hello everybody. This is a true crime podcast from the Hybrid Warfare Analytical Group at Ukraine Crisis Media Center, where we discuss Russian propaganda, hybrid threats, and the influence tools they use. Today's topic of conversation is the drug addict smear campaign against Zelensky, deconstructing Russian propaganda tactics. In this podcast, we will take a look at what rhetoric Russian propagandists have taken to deliberately misrepresent the Ukrainian government. Russian propagandists have consistently employed insults and falsehoods to undermine Zelensky's global influence throughout the war. One of their primary line of propaganda is, and recently renewed, recycled and rinsed in every possible way, labeling Zelensky as a drug addict. This tactic aims to deceive the Russian and Ukrainian audience by portraying the Ukrainian government as being led by an illegitimate, corrupt, and intoxicated leader at war. The renewal of this propaganda campaign stemmed from Zelensky's call to legalize medical cannabis for Ukrainian soldiers suffering from the war's effects, and Ukraine's continued participation in high-level international events Russia is no longer privy to. Tina Kandelaki, a relatively reserved propagandist, if there is such a thing, describes how the American policy was
bound to reach post-Soviet regions sooner or later.
Likes of Zelensky, serving as a part of their systematic search because he
fits all the boxes.
They needed someone who is
vulnerable, emotionally unstable, susceptible to the influence of drugs and alcohol or whatever, easily manipulated,
told Kandelaki. And voila, she claims they found him. In her portrayal, Zelensky emerges as the quintessential talentless politician under Western control, deliberately making decisions that would inflict long-lasting damage on his own country. Kandelaki employs the rhetoric to paint Zelensky as fundamentally unsuitable for his role, insinuating that his success is solely due to being under the influence of drugs, although offers no evidence, utterly clueless about his actions, and merely executing the agenda of the United States. This narrative isn't unique. It's a common tactic in propaganda efforts aimed at diminishing Zelensky's and consequently the Ukrainian government's achievements. The underlying message is clear. The propagandists aim to shift the credit away from Zelensky, therefore the Ukrainian government's success, with it not being Ukraine that has withstood the might of the Russian army, but the USA. To admit it was Zelensky's leadership, the so-called talentless politician, as she says, that confronted the decades-long leadership of the Russian Federation, it would be a level of humiliation the Russian propaganda machine would struggle to recover from quickly. A narrative designed to undermine his credibility and cast doubt on the true source of Ukraine's resilience. Anton Krasovsky. In a widely circulated interview clip within the Russian propaganda sphere, Zelensky discusses Ukraine's attempts to negotiate with Putin and Russia during his presidency. He expresses uncertainty about Putin's current status and questions whether the person appearing on the screen is the real Putin, implying a sense of weakness and directionlessness in Russia's leadership. Anton Krasovsky, a state propagandist of the worst sort, known for his call to burn Ukrainian children, seizes on Zelensky's remarks and suggests that such conclusions could only be reached if Zelensky is under the influence of drugs. Krasovsky, he says,
"That's a lot of drugs for one man to take. It's no longer just coke."
The underlying objective of this strategy is to portray Zelensky's statement as absurd, to cast doubt on the health of and stability of the Russian leader, a narrative forbidden in the Russian propaganda machine. Why? Because it threatens the regime's stability. A leader's health is often seen as a reflection of their power and ability to govern. Any uncertainty surrounding a dictator's strength invites both internal and external forces to fight for a position of power. Krasovsky's approach here is to reflect and project, depicting Zelensky as a progressing drug addict and delusional leader who lacks a firm grasp on reality and is thus incapable of effectively leading a country. By portraying Zelensky as a drug addict and insinuating his progression to even stronger substances, the intention is to diminish the respect that Zelensky and the Ukrainian government has garnered throughout the course of this war, while detracting the attention from Putin's health. Maria Zakharova. Zakharova employs the drug addict rhetoric, perhaps on par with Volodymyr Solovyov. In a statement, she draws attention to the construction of a new housing complex in the devastated by Russia city of Mariupol, temporarily occupied by Russia, a year after Russia's full-scale invasion and after continuous shelling. This construction was used to serve as a showcase of Russia's perceived strength and ability to undertake infrastructure projects, even while claiming to be under constant shelling from the
Kiev regime,
as Zakharova frames it. Zakharova questions
why Zelensky did not allocate a portion of Ukraine's substantial aid to rebuild the war-torn Donbass region, according to the Minsk agreements, creating something comparable to the housing complex in Mariupol.
She attributes this alleged failure to drugs, nationalism, and corruption. By doing so, Zakharova attempts to routinely depict Zelensky as unfit for leadership, who serves his own interests in rather than the peoples of Ukraine, an attempt to show corruption in Ukraine as one that is increasing under Zelensky, whereas in reality, year on year, it is significantly reducing. It's essentially a cheap ploy to draw a sharp contrast between Zelensky and Putin, portraying Putin as capable and a godlike figure capable of overseeing major construction projects while under constant fire. Second, it is intended to mislead the audience by casting doubt on Ukraine's aid and raising questions about why Russia appears to be able to complete such projects while Ukraine allegedly fails, employing a decisive and manipulative strategy in order to shape perceptions, discredit Zelensky, and promote a narrative that portrays Russia favorably in comparison to Ukraine. In another post, she speaks of Dana Borisova, an actress who apparently crossed paths with Zelensky pre-president, who speaks openly in an interview about Zelensky's apparent drug use. Zakharova misleads, writing,
Many talk about Zelensky's heavy long-term addiction to drugs, particularly cocaine, mostly those who saw him on the set.
Roman Gorovanov. In one of his posts on Telegram, Gorovanov, a propagandist and presenter of the propagandist channel Solyov Live, shares a video of Zelensky and quotes,
"This is what the destruction of a person by drugs is."
While it may be true that Zelensky appears unkempt and exhausted compared to other heads of states during press conferences, it is important to consider the context. Zelensky is currently leading a country at war. During the invasion, Zelensky has consistently worn khaki, similar to other heads of states during past wars. Foreign leaders visiting Ukraine also don khaki when accompanying Zelensky to non-office locations, such as their visits to Bucha. It's worth noting that the comparison being made is likely with Putin, who routinely wears a suit. But in contrast to Putin, Zelensky regularly meets with military personnel, including those on the front lines. A suit just isn't practical. His appearance, when described as a destruction, is a reflection of a leader leading a nation at war, not a result of drug use. Moreover, Gorovanov and his team present a manipulative video of Zelensky twisting the situation around legalizing marijuana by suggesting that Zelensky is leading the country towards extinction. He draws analogies, such as kicking a drug addict out of a building, painting Zelensky as undesirable to the Ukrainian people. Lastly, Golovanov claims that if Russia doesn't come out victorious in this war, Ukraine will be overrun by drug addicts. He concludes,
If your child were to be born and grow up in Ukraine, he would smoke cannabis. Then they'll start injecting themselves and end up dead in the ditch. This is Ukraine's future.
Russian propaganda has consistently smeared President Zelensky as a drug addict to undermine his global influence. This tactic aims to discredit him and shift credit away from Ukraine's resilience. Propagandists employ baseless claims and manipulation to depict Zelensky as incompetent and controlled by the West, all while sowing discord and favorably portraying Russia.